Welcome to the Anthony Foster Laboratory 2025 Spring Student Award Ceremony. Well, I'm very glad to present this program to you first. So today we will have Heinz Stefan Fellowship Award Ceremony, and after that we will have Charles Zahn Fellowship Award Ceremony, and then after these two, we are going to have a Straub Award ceremony. Okay, so therefore, okay, we are going to have three very exciting presentations. Okay, yeah. So the first is for Heinz Stefan Award, and Professor Judy Yuan is going to do the introduction about the award and then present the award.
Thank you.
Okay, yeah, okay, yeah. We just assigned our work between. Yeah, okay. So let me introduce the Heinz Stefan Award first. And Professor Stefan has been Anthony Foster Laboratory's faculty researcher for many years. He also served as Associate Director for Research of the lab for many years. And he first came to Minnesota and Anthony Foster Laboratory in early 60s, and as a postdoc from Germany. And he actually is probably the only person now in the lab who met founding director Dr. Lawrence Straub, okay, when he first arrived here. Okay, yeah. And so these days you can still see Professor Stefan in the lab, and especially on some of the Wednesdays in the Straub library in having lunch. So next time when you see him, and together with Dr. Chris Ellis, next time when you see him, say hello. Okay, yeah, for students, yeah, okay. And so he has done tremendous amount of research, okay, in environmental fluid mechanics and so on and so forth, okay. And then, okay, after his retirement, then his former colleagues, students, and put up this award. Especially, okay, I wanted to thank we call him Dr. Dharma, okay, and he made great contributions. He was the one who made this award available. By the way, okay, Dr. Dharma, he also served on our College of Science and Engineering's advisory committee board. Okay, so, okay. Well, okay, without much ado, okay, then, okay, let me give it to Professor Yuan to tell you the excitement about the student.
Thanks, Lian. Lian gives the best introduction to Heinz Stefan, the award. So I'm so glad you did it. Thank you. Yeah, it's my great honor to introduce Yuan Li, today's Heinz Stefan Fellowship Award winner. So Yuan was born in Shandong province, and then she did her bachelor and master degree in China University of Petroleum Engineering, also in Shandong province. Yuan was has been very close with her family, so her family wants her to stay in Shandong. But 4 years ago, she made the decision to cross the ocean and came to the United States all the way by herself. And I'm very proud of Yuan because over the past 4 years, I've seen how she grew, both as a person, as a researcher. She tried to figure out, she has been by herself figuring out all the tech stuff, renting a house, buying a car, and everything. And in her research, she has done research in 2 different directions about how microbes transport in soil. And she developed a new technology to remove harmful algal blooms. Last year, she proposed to attend this harmful algae conference. Nobody in my group has been there, and Yuan went there all by herself. And more excitingly, she won the Best Presentation Award. So I'm super proud of Yuan. And a fun fact about Yuan, so I used to be very proud that I was always, most of the time, the earliest person at shuffle, and especially when I was living closer. And then I realized there was a red car always coming ahead of me. Who came here before 7 a.m.? And then I realized it was Yuan. Yuan, I'm very proud of you. I know there are a lot of uncertainty in the job market and in the economy. You are concerned, but I know you'll make it, and I know the spirit matters, and I'm sure you'll have a great career, and I will always be here rooting for you. So without further ado, please come to accept the award.
Hi, thank you for Judy's introduction. So I'm just gonna to talk about my research. And firstly, I think I need to thank to Judy. She's always supportive and encouraged me a lot in these 4 years. And I joined the SAFO in August 2021. It's the end of my 4th year here. And thank you everybody Ben is not here, and Ben, James, and Mickey's help. And my research is about remove the harmful algal cells through the clay algae flocculations. Oh, sorry, I forgot to thank the important person, the Heinz Stefan. So the Heinz Stefan is a professor in CGE and SAFOS, and he's a pioneer in environmental hydraulics and well known for the development for the Ming Lakes and the Amman Stream water quality simulation models. And he has always 4 famous books and more than 200 papers. And besides academic, he also mentored about the 100 masters and PhD students. And thank you for Hans Stefan to create this fellowship. So first, I think I will give you a little introduction about the Harvard alga bloom. So the Harvard alga bloom are the rapid growth of the algae cells in water. And these are 3 photos of the lakes in Minnesota with Harvard alga bloom. And some species can produce toxins, so this is the reason why we need to remove it from the water body. And many researchers have proposed different ways to remove it. And the most promising way is using clay. So the first photo is a field work in China try to spray the clay suspensions to remove the algal cells in the lakes in China. And we can see the second figure just to illustrate what happens when we add clay. So the clay particles and the algal cells will generate aggregates. And with the aggregates growth, they will settle down to the bottom and remove it from the water body. So in the following research I'm going to share with you is research about to investigate the role of decay in turbulence in the determine algae cells and clay particles aggregate size, settling velocity, and density. So the motivation is as follows. So actually, people's done a lot of tube experiments to test the clay's efficiency in labs, but it has difference in the field work because in the labs there are mixing well culture with clays and cell culture, cells, but in the lakes there are turbulence and we can't mix the clay suspension with the whole lakes. So this is the reason why we want to do this research. And we have a cool instrument, the plankton tower. And using this one, we can introduce the turbulence in one column. And here we're using the 4 different turbulence levels, with adjusting the motor's frequency. So here we're using a camera to record the flux and to analyze the flux size and the settling velocity. So the first is the remote efficiency for the results. So this is what we care about. So the remote efficiency is to quantify the ratios of cells removed from a water. So it indicates to show how many cells were removed. As our result, you can see with higher initial turbulence, the pink and the triangular symbols, you can get a greater final remote efficiency. And for the red figures, you can see the color difference after we introduce turbulence. So the first image in the figure B is the initial color of the algal culture without addition of the clay. And after we add clay and to just like mixing it under different turbulence, we can see the color changing from super green to transparent. And so this is, and from the figure 1, we can still see like the higher initial turbulence intensity may hinder the aggregate formation, like the slower increase of the pink label. And while the moderate turbulence labels can just like generate a quicker aggregate formation, like the yellow one. And the second part is for the second velocity. And we can see the aggregates, the generation times from the pink label and different. So after about the 40 minutes, we can see the flux generation under the 4 Hertz. But under the control and 1 Hertz and 2 Hertz, we can see the flux after 20 minutes. So which means the higher turbulence levels hinders the flux generation. And after that, we plot the equilibrium second velocities in the second figure. And there it shows like with the highest remote efficiency observed in the highest turbulence levels, we can see the highest second velocity there. And after that, we analyze the aggregate size and calculate the density of flux according to the Stokes law. So, but for the aggregate size, during all cases, we can say the flux size can reach up to 400 micrometers, no matter in the control group or at our turbulence pool. And during the final 2 hours, the equilibrium radius, the radius in generally increase with their corresponding turbulence levels. And for the densities, we can say the highest density can reach about 1,015 kilogram per cubic meter, and it happens in the highest turbulence levels under the 4 Hertz. And here is the discussion. We just like include all the cases we done there, and we can for the x-axis is the represent the ratio of the aggregate diameter to the smallest ID size, the Kolmogorov scale. So we can say, just like in all cases, the aggregate size is smaller than half of the Kolmogorov scale. So which means the aggregate size couldn't just like reach up, above the smallest ID size. Yeah. So this is a short presentation of the recent work we done, and the conclusion is that in our cases, the turbulence we use, we can say the turbulence flow can enhance the remote efficiency of halves by up to 3-fold compared to the control group. And the higher turbulence intensities and the corresponding energy dissipation rate, it is aggregate generation, and they can increase the density of the aggregates with faster stepping velocity and compared to the non-turbulent conditions. And finally, this is the previously works I have done in Straub to investigate the corner flow and how to use in LabNet to remove the Haber-Alga bloom. And yeah, thank you all, thank you everybody in Straub to help me, and thank you my group member, and thank you Judy, and yeah, that's all. Thank you so much. Any questions?
Let's move on with the program. Okay, and the next award we are going to present is Charles Zahn Fellowship. Okay. And this award was established recently to honor Professor Zahn. And Professor Charles Zahn, he graduated from, he came to the University of Minnesota in 1956 as a graduate student. And he got his PhD here, and then he stayed as a professor starting in 1961. And he worked here all those years till retirement in 1999. And so in all those years, he had supervised many students, and most of them were international students. Professor Zahn himself is an immigrant, so he understood and the challenges in the international student they face. So in his lecture, when there were international students in his classes, then he would adjust the pace and he paid special attention to the blackboard writing for that. Okay. And also, he was extremely patient for his advices and to help them overcome the culture shock. So in 2020, unfortunately, we heard the sad news from one of his former students, Professor George Wu. And George told us, well, unfortunately, Professor Zahn passed away. So that was in 2020. And then, during the pandemic, of course, that made us more sad. And but one thing about the pandemic is, for all the, if you remember, for those of you here, then we put all our seminars online. So this online seminar series, actually, there's one thing that was really nice is to put our alumni together. So one of Professor Zahn's former student, Professor Su Gong, G-O-N-G, So she watched one of our award ceremony online. Then she got inspired. She said, well, how about we establish the award to honor Professor Zahn. So about, I think, 8 of the Professor Zahn's former students grouped together quickly, and they established this award. So quickly. So the first award was given out in 2022. And this award is to be given to a Stanford student and doing research at Stanford, and with a particular focus on international students. So today, I'm very happy to present the next award winner. And for me to do that, actually, I have one page of presentation to give myself. So let me pose you a question, give you a question to you, How do I move on? So, well, think about this, a bit, So what's the Jack and Rose, those two, That was the movie I watched when I was at your age as a student, And G.I. Taylor is the founding grandfather of modern fluid mechanics. And so a lot of things we study came from him. And I really, my personal view is I really don't do too much about the citation numbers, those kind of things. But when the number reaches a certain level, then that really means something. So G.I. Taylor had the highest citation number in fluid mechanics all the time. And who had the second highest number? You just met him. Professor Parviz Moin, he was the chair of the Stanford Review Committee, and he came here. And so I'm so glad, he came to visit us and gave us a lot of very good suggestions. And he is an alumni. So he graduated from Minnesota. And well, let me stop talking about the citation. So why do these 3 people, I put them together? So what is the common thing they have among them? And that is what I'm getting. The answer is Anup. And well, why? I haven't finished my sentence yet. So that is, the answer is Anup. I'm sorry, it has nothing to do with you. It's your research topic. Of that. So what research did Anup do? I will let him talk about that himself. But let me just say a few words about Anup. So Anup got his bachelor's degree from Goa University in India, and then he got his master's degree from Indian Institute of Technology, Madras. And after that, and then he came to University of Minnesota to pursue his PhD degree. So Anup's research is doing computer simulation, And but Anup has this amazing capabilities. He is very good at looking at experimental data. So in our collaborative research with other collaborators. Okay, so he was very good at looking at their measurement data, okay, and to do the analysis and ask questions, and that is for a lot of different groups. Okay, yeah, and I will let him show his results. Okay, in his presentation. Okay, yeah. So basically, okay, it's a really productive research career he has been doing here, okay, and co-authors with two bigger papers. And then okay, another one who got reviewed recently, and which was described by the two reviewers as one of the best advancement in recent years on this research topic. So without much ado, okay, let me present this award to.
Hello everyone, and yeah, I was even surprised with the slides Professor presented. I was not aware of that. So thank you, Professor, for that. So yeah, the title of my topic is Demystifying Marine Fog, and in this, as Professor mentioned, we will look into how we use large ID simulation in order to simulate marine fog. But before that, okay, yeah. Before that, I would like to acknowledge those for which I'm present here. So, Professor Charles Song was a professor in Department of Civil Engineering here, and the Charles Song Fellowship has been established in his name, and he has been a pioneer in the field of computational hydraulics, and he has mentored generations of researchers. And few of the researchers had a wonderful vision in establishing a fellowship in his name, and I'm truly grateful to them. Also, I would like to extend my gratitude to Professor Lien Shen and the Cephala Award Committee for recognizing me with this honor. I'm truly thankful to them, and I'm really motivated in continuing and pursuing my research journey further. So let's see a brief history about the marine fog. So the highest amount of marine fog is observed in the northern Atlantic and the northern Pacific Ocean, especially during summer months. So interesting fact about this is the first record of the ice, the sea fog, was dated back into early 1100s in the Icelandic sagas. But the real scientific research was done much later in 1913 by G.I. Taylor, and this was in response to the Titanic tragedy that happened in 1912 that prompted this particular study. So Sir G.I. Taylor conducted his research in the fog-prone region of the Grand Banks, and one interesting fact about his research was he used kites in order to measure the data, and he did that about the whaling ship named Scotia. And then he published his results in this particular paper. Now, moving on, we might wonder, 100 years since his study, why are we still studying about the marine fog? But for one, the dense fog continues to remain one of the most significant reasons behind the maritime fog accidents. So, marine fog appears so quickly that the navigation becomes extremely difficult, and it sometimes endangers ship and crews. Also, it disrupts the harbor operations. Another reason is the predictability of marine fog is around 50%, which makes it one of the least predictable weather phenomena. Now, the main reason behind the less predictability is because of the multi-scale nature of the fog. So, the numerical weather prediction model, which are mostly dependent on the large mesoscale or large-scale processes, and it often models or parameterizes the small-scale processes. Now, this small-scale processes parameterizations is often not accurate for marine fog, and this is where our large eddy simulations comes into play. Now, large eddy simulation can provide us more details about the 4-dimensional description of the fog. So the large eddy simulation, we all know, is a high resolution technique for capturing complex interactions between turbulence, radiation, and the surface processes. But the main limitation behind the conventional large eddy simulation is its domain size. It's particularly restricted to a smaller domain, and it fails to account for the large scale dynamics, which also affects fog, as we looked at it earlier. So the large scale dynamics include large scale advection, subsidence, which also affects the fog formation and its dissipation. So in order to include this into our simulation, we added certain terms into our governing equations. And these terms are large scale advection, which basically is the circulation of the air over the larger scale, and a subsidence term, basically a sinking of air. And also, in addition to these two terms, we added a relaxation term, which kind of nudges the simulation towards the true state, just as a safety parameter. And in addition to this, we also added Lagrangian cloud model and bulk cloud model to study the fog microphysical behavior. Now, with this approach, we were able to simulate some of the real world events, and in this particular presentation, I would briefly discuss about its application to marine fog. So this case was in the Grand Banks in the northern Atlantic Ocean. So here it's Canada, Nova Scotia. And this was a case study during the Fatima Grand Banks campaign, which happened on 13 July 2023. And this particular data is from the ceilometer backscatter instrument. So this is the instrument which measures laser backscatter in order to measure its fog thickness and its behavior over time. So the highlighted region here is the fog region, and high backscatter means the fog formation. So on 13 July, we see that the fog formation occurs around 0200 UTC and continues until 1100 UTC on the same day. Now, we use this particular observation in order to drive our simulations, and these are our simulation results. And for this, we used Lagrangian cloud modeling, and we named that as L-cube coupling. So this is how we simulated the life cycle of fog. So the fog formation was around 100 UTC, and it continued until 1100 UTC. And during the maintenance stage of the fog, we see the fog height reached around 120 meters, which matches closely with the observed value from the ceilometer data. Now, this particular study has been analyzed in detail in our paper, currently the revision of which has been submitted. Now, next, let's move on to another type of fog known as a stratus lowering fog. So the low-lying stratus clouds eventually lowers down and fog formation occurs. So in this particular case, we move our focus onto the Yellow Sea. So this is between China and South Korea. And the time of interest is July 2, 2023 during Fatima Yellow Sea campaign. So again, we look at the ceilometer backscatter data, and we see the stratus clouds are present at around 1200 UTC on 2nd of July. And as the time progresses, this stratus cloud base eventually lowers down, and then fog formation occurs. Now, we take this particular case, and for driving our large scale dynamics, we use RFI reanalysis data. And this is one of the simulation results. So this is the evolution of the cloud water specific humidity over time. And as we see, as the time progresses, the stratus base eventually lowers down, and in the highlighted region, we see it has descended towards the surface and fog formation occurs. Now, this fog formation is around 2100 UTC, which matches with the observation timing of 2100 UTC. So this case has been analyzed in detail, and we are currently preparing the manuscript of this. So with this, I would like to end with the visualization of stratus cloud, which I did over the ocean. Yeah, and thank you. I'm open for questions. Yeah.
So I didn't realize that fogs like this were really just an advection of a stratus cloud down. Is there any part of the fog that is the result of local seawater interaction?
Yeah.
Evaporation or something? Condensation?
So yeah, so for this particular case itself, so I have not mentioned this clearly, but for this case, what we did is we took two boundary conditions. One was the sea surface temperature, which was derived from the RFI reanalysis data, and one was the actual. And we observed that there was a temperature drop of at least 3 degrees in the actual as compared to the RFI data. And if we took the boundary condition, which is derived from the RFI data, and we run our simulation, we see that the stratus base was lowering, but the surface fog was not formed. But for the case with the highest temperature drop, which is the actual one, we see this particular result. So we see that the temperature also played an important role in the fog formation in this particular case. So, and also, as you mentioned, there is the advection fog case, in which the sea surface temperature plays a very important role. So the moist and hot air from the tropics flows over to the northern regions where the temperature is cooler, and because of the surface interactions, sea surface interactions, the moist air there condenses and fog formation occurs. So, yeah.
Other questions?
I'm curious, how do you think the particles in air play a role in fog formation?
Yeah, for this particular case, we used a Lagrangian cloud model. So basically, what we are doing is tracking the aerosols and its activation. So again, it plays a very important role. So what we observed here is there are two modes of aerosols. One is the coarse mode aerosol and the accumulation mode aerosol. And what we saw is the activation of the coarse mode aerosols, and it eventually led to this increase in the liquid water content, which we see over here. So yeah, it plays a very important role.
And you are doing continuum scale, I guess, right?
Sorry?
You are working on continuum scale, right? You are not simulating the particle scale interaction.
Right now, for fog, since the size of the droplets is very small, we are not including that in the simulations. Yeah.
Thanks.
Great question. One more? Otherwise, well, then I will reserve this last question to myself. Yeah. Do you know where did the Titanic sink on its back?
I think
that is your study site, right?
Yeah.
I know it's around there, but
yeah, it's somewhere around here, not much far in this particular region. Yeah.
Okay. Well, okay. Let's move on with the program. Thank you, Anup. The last award we are going to present is the annual Straub Award. Okay, and so this award was established to honor our lab's founding director, Dr. Lawrence Straub. And Dr. Lawrence Straub, he came to the university in early 30s, 1930s. Okay, yeah. And he spent 2 years with the ASCE Freeman Fellowship, which sponsored him to visit Europe for 2 years. So at that time, he went through Europe European countries, and especially in Germany, he visited all kinds of hydraulic labs and study what is going on there. And then when he came back to the US, he had this great idea. So he said that he was going to establish a world-class hydraulics lab. And when he said that, he already had this site in his mind. So he came to University of Minnesota as an associate professor. He was in his early 30s, very young. And then he already had this site in his mind. And then in the 30s, there were Great Depression, and there were President Roosevelt's New Deal, and there's Works Progress Administration. So basically, federal government instilled a lot of fundings to infrastructure building, to research infrastructures. So Dr. Straub, he secured funding for that, and he designed the lab together with his students. And within 2 years, this lab was built and commissioned. So that was really something. So 1938, November 17th, was the birthday of Stanley Fossil Laboratory. And Dr. Straub, he served as lab director for many years until 1963. On a weekend, on a Sunday morning, then he passed away in his office. Oh, by the way, it's my office. A current office there, and he passed away there. Why? So basically, he died on his job. And then after that, then his former colleagues, students, and friends then established this award. So the first Straub Award was given in 1966. And after that, then each year there was a award given. And the criteria of the award is it is going to be given to the most how to say it? It's most anyway, best. I would describe best thesis award, right? In the area of hydraulics and eco-hydraulics and related area, including environmental hydromechanics. So that was in the original language for that. So the award was selected among all the PhD theses done in the previous year. And the solicitation was towards the entire country, actually entire world. And then each department could only nominate one award. And then among all the theses we received, then there is a committee reviewing the thesis to decide who the winner is. And the committee now it has 3 external members and 1 internal members. I can tell you who they are secretly. And but there are many good people served on the Straub Award committees. And the winners are every year there's one. And I don't know if you got a chance to look at the award in the Straub library. And they are listed there. So with this award, there's going to be a check, and there's going to be certificate, and there's going to be coin, and but also the award winner's name will be on the wall of Safo, and with a picture, And if you got a chance, or if you haven't, well, you will recognize many names for that. And those are the leading researchers in all those years. So in some sense, I feel this Stanley Fossil Laboratories Straub Award is a very good mechanism to identify future research leaders. And then among them, really, you can see the authors of some books, and they are I even saw university presidents' name. And also, but most importantly, they are prominent researchers in the field for that. Well, well, let me introduce the award winner this year. That is Dr. Einara Zahn, And she got her degree from Princeton University, okay, and in Professor Ali Boze's group, and she currently is a postdoc staying in the same group, okay, and her research area is urban and forest atmosphere field, and she studied transport of water vapor and CO2, okay, in the atmosphere and their interactions with the forest and so on and so forth. Yeah. So she did very nice computer simulations, but she also looked at the real forest. Okay, yeah. So therefore, okay, her thesis was valued very high by the award committee. Congratulations. Okay. Yeah, okay. So, and thank you for coming to visit us. Okay. And so let me present this award to you. So, your name will be on our wall, okay? Your picture will be on our wall. You are
hopefully
stuck with us.
Yeah, maybe I have to take another.
And you can claim, okay, well, you are Stanford friend. Okay, yeah. And actually, for me, like when I, met with other people, okay, then if I recognize that it's a Straub Award winner, and usually they would come to me to introduce themselves to say, hey, okay, I visited Stanford, 15 years ago or something, about Straub Award for that. Yeah. So I look forward to seeing you in the following many decades.
Thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here. I could not be more honored to receive this award. It's really, really an honor. I was like, I'm really happy. And I really want to thank everyone for inviting me here. Everyone has been so nice, so welcoming. I learned about so much cool research here. So I really hope in the future to keep a lot of collaborations with people here in the lab. So I've done quite a few different topics in my dissertation, from urban environments to more natural environments, field experiments, and also simulations. But today I want to focus on one particular project that was particularly exciting because I was able to combine both field experiments but also simulations. So here in the back, I have a photo of the Amazon forest. So just a little bit of curiosity, when I was doing my master's in Brazil, I had the chance to go to the Amazon forest to work on a field experiment, and it was one of the most exciting experiences of my life, the most beautiful place I've ever been to, so if you ever have the chance, I could not encourage you more to go. So then throughout my work, I had the chance to work with a lot of data from the Amazon, so it was always felt a little bit personal. So I'm showing you an image of a forest, of course, but whatever, we have plants, we have trees, we have CO2 and water vapor around. So starting here with a single plant, we know that plants are uptaking CO2 from the atmosphere for photosynthesis, and that CO2 is going to be stored in the plant and the soil in other different types of carbon. At the same time that we have photosynthesis, plants are uptaking water from the soil. So most of this water is not really directly related to the photosynthesis, but it's a way to regulate how open the plant stomata is. So to make sure that the stomata is open, so you have this gradient of water from the soil all the way to the leaf. Okay, so if you combine these two quantities, you can define the water use efficiency. So very efficient plants, for instance, they're going to take up more CO2 and not lose as much water. Okay, and so when we have large biomes like the Amazon or other ecosystems, we of course have to represent their impact on regional and global climate. So we have to represent those ecosystems somehow and how they are impacted by different forces. So thinking, for instance, about carbon assimilation and water vapor transpiration, they might be influenced by light availability, air temperature, how much moisture we have in the soil, CO2 levels, and also plant physiology. So some plants might take more CO2 during the day, some at night, and so there are many different factors there that we try to capture in those models. And we have different models that have been developed in previous decades. So there's a lot we know, but of course we still have challenges, right? So for instance, when you think about an entire ecosystem, sometimes you have a lot of heterogeneity. So you have different species, you might have shading, and so on. So really representing an entire ecosystem might be more challenging because we have plant-specific parameters. We also have to think about scaling to a very large area. And even some physics might be still missing that we don't know about, or how they're going to evolve when you think about increasing CO2 and increasing temperature in the future. So we still want to make sure that we represent our ecosystems the best way we can. We want to improve the accuracy. And every time we develop a model, one of the things that we always want to do is to compare to experiments, right? We want to validate or evaluate our models. So how can we do that? So I want to model plant transpiration, plant photosynthesis. So I want to compare this against direct measurements of transpiration and photosynthesis. And this is going to be the main challenge here of my presentation today. How can we do that? And that's because when you think about an entire ecosystem, you also have soil, right? You have CO2 respiration, or I'm sorry, you have soil respiration that's releasing CO2 into the environment, and that's because you have organic matter, you have microorganisms in there. And at the same time, you have soil evaporation, which is now purely physical, it's not driven by the plants. So what we can do as of now, we know very well how to measure the entire ecosystem, so you can measure the entire water-vapor exchange, that combining plants and soil alone. So what can we do to now separate how much the plants alone are responsible for? So here I am defining a quantity called ET, which is my total evapotranspiration. And that combines transpiration from plants and evaporation from the soil. And similarly, I'm defining a net CO2 exchange, which combines plant photosynthesis and soil respiration. So just to highlight here, I'm defining as photosynthesis and soil respiration, but in the literature you can find different definitions such as ecosystem respiration or gross primary productivity. This distinction is not very relevant for me right now, but they exist. But why do you want to do flux partitioning? Why do you want to estimate plant fluxes alone? So as I mentioned, one big motivation is to use those measurements now to make sure our models are representing these large ecosystems as well as they can. I can also be interested in more specific questions, as for instance, as CO2 levels rise and air temperature also rises. So how are different plant species or ecosystems respond to these different changes in drivers? And even more specific questions, such as in agriculture. So a lot of the collaboration I've done since I started working on this project were from researchers from the US Department of Agriculture who are interested in estimating transpiration across various crops in California. So there are many research questions that are very relevant and that really need a way to estimate plant fluxes alone. Okay, so going back to my plant, I told you that we want to estimate plant transpiration photosynthesis for a large area, right? And I said that's very challenging. So how have people been doing this? Okay, so there are different ways that we might do in different situations. So for instance, one common method that's used is sap flow. And that's a direct measurement where you have a sensor that you can attach to a tree. You measure the water flow inside the xylem. And that's going to be, it's assumed to be equal the plant transpiration. But as you can imagine, this is going to be challenging in the sense of expanding to an entire ecosystem because there are only so many plants you can measure from, and also for the temporal scale. Ideally, we want a transpiration for a full year, at least for a full season and so on. So that's going to be more challenging when you're thinking about the entire footprint, not to mention costing. So that would be a method that is maybe more ideal for a smaller scale experiment or a more controlled experiment. A second way would be measuring directly at the leaf level. So this would be leaf level measurements, where now you basically attach a sensor to a leaf and you can measure the exchanges that are happening there. So you can imagine that is also more ideal, perhaps to a smaller scale experiment when it's easier to extrapolate to the density of leaves that you have or the density of plants that you have in the area. So those are great for a few applications, but they still do not help me to look at the spatial and temporal scales that I'm interested in. So what can I do now? So one question that I still have is, okay, we have CO2 and water vapor laying around the plant. So it's being released from the soil or being uptaken by the plant. So we have this concentration that is constantly changing around the plant. Another thing that we have around us, the environment, is turbulence. So this chaotic movement of air that's very efficient in mixing quantities. So in my plant canopy, for instance, what turbulence is doing is always mixing. So it's carrying concentrations of CO2 from the soil all the way to the top and vice versa. So it's constantly moving. And what that tells me is that if I can measure turbulence, I have a way to quantify the total fluxes. And by total fluxes here, I mean the total ecosystem flux, so evaporation, transpiration from soil and plants alone. And to illustrate this idea a little better on how turbulence can give us fluxes, I want to introduce you to eddy covariance. So eddy covariance is a method that has been around now for many decades. Here is one of the networks that we have. You see that some of those sites are operating for longer than 20 years. So basically they have sensors on a tower operating for many decades. So this shows how good and reliable this method is. So we know how to measure turbulence. We know how to compute the total fluxes. And here I'm showing a picture of the Amazon again, where we have a tower. Okay, so the way this works, you have this very tall tower that has to stick out outside of the plant canopy. And at the top, we have sensors. So our sensors are going to sample turbulence. And turbulence is things changing very fast. So as I have turbulence moving things around, as it transports parcels of air towards the sensor that have a certain concentration of CO2 and water vapor, I'm going to be sampling time series many times per second. So I have a time series that looks like that, for instance. And given how chaotic turbulence is, the way we analyze turbulence is statistically. So throughout this talk, you hear me talking about covariances, correlations, and variances. That's because that's usually how we analyze turbulence data. So what I'm doing here, I am taking measurements of the CO2, C, and I am splitting into a turbulent component, which is C prime, and C bar, which is the mean field. So now I'm going to go ahead and compute the covariances of the turbulence component of CO2 and the vertical velocity. And that's because the vertical velocity is which is transporting my scalars towards the sensor. So computed the covariances, now I have the total evapotranspiration and the total CO2 exchange. And again, I'm going to emphasize that I have the total because the sensor does not know where the particles are coming from. It does not know if the water vapor was from soil evaporation or from plant transpiration. So the question that I still have is, okay, but how much came from the plants alone and from the soil alone? So that's what I want to address now. And the way that I'm going to address here is still looking at turbulence. So maybe there is something imprinted in the turbulence, a signature that can help me also identify the source of those fluxes. So the first person to propose a similar framework was Scanlon in 2008. So he had the following idea. So we know that our sensors are measuring CO2 and water vapor that can come from anywhere. Let's imagine for a second that we can also separate the origin. So imagine that the sensor knows exactly, oh, this is from the soil or this is from the plant. So you'd have 4 time series. So using some of the theory that we know for many years now on how to parameterize fluxes in the surface layer, he proposed a set of analytical equations that allow us to enter turbulence statistics, such as covariances and correlations, and to partition into the 4 flux components: transpiration, evaporation, respiration, and photosynthesis. And of course, we do not know the 4 individual time series, so we need a way to close this problem, okay? And the way he did that was to use the water use efficiency. So given that I have turbulence I can measure, and I have a good estimate of the water use efficiency, I can go ahead and compute flux partitioning, so I know exactly how much came from plants alone. And I'm starting with this method here because it's widely used across different ecosystems for flux partitioning. So it's quite popular, but has challenges, such as the water use efficiency. So it's a ratio of 2 quantities that we are trying to compute in the first place. So you can imagine that it has lots of uncertainties. And the way that we usually get this is using parameterizations. But as with any parameterizations, we also have uncertainties there, and different options that we use, they diverge by many orders of magnitude sometimes. So they add a lot of uncertainty to the method. So what I wanted to do was, okay, can I explore even more turbulence information and get rid of the need of the water use efficiency? So in a way I'm saying, can I completely ignore every single information about the plant, only look at the air around the plant, and still try to understand how much transpiration came from there? So to do that, now I'm going to move to a slightly different framework. So I want to first start with this plot. And what I'm showing here in the y-axis is basically turbulence related to the fluctuations of water vapor. And the x-axis is information of CO2. So basically, if they're negative, it means that the air parcel was depleted in CO2 or water vapor. And if it's positive, it's going to be rich in that concentration. Okay, so now I'm going to make the following assumption. I know that near the soil, I have a lot of soil evaporation, and I have a lot of soil respiration. So the air there is going to be rich in CO2 and rich in water vapor. So now let's imagine that turbulence is transported those parcels towards the sensor. As the sensor samples that, those points should most likely fall in the first quadrant, in red. Similarly, near the canopy, near the leaves, plants are taking CO2. So the air there is more depleted in CO2 than average. And as turbulence now transports those parcels towards the sensor, I'm going to be able to separate those points now in the first quadrant. And those I'm going to say are proportional to photosynthesis and transpiration. So this is what I'm showing here is what I'm going to call a conditional sampling, given that I have this condition on how I'm going to separate my measurements. So this is my conceptual framework. Now I have the next challenge. How do I translate that into equations? So the first method that I propose is called conditional added covariance. So here I have, again, my quadrant analysis. And typically, if I want to compute the total flux, I'm going to go ahead and compute a covariance using all the points I have. But here I'm going to compute sample fluxes that I call FE and FT here that are only going to be using points from the first and second quadrant. So first quadrant, I'm going to assume that's proportional to respiration, evaporation, and second quadrant proportional to photosynthesis and transpiration. So having those sample fluxes, I'm going to now make another assumption that the ratio of those sample fluxes is equal to the ratio of the flux components. So having this ratio now, it's easy for me to go back and combine that with the total fluxes and separate transpiration. So now I also have evaporation, and I can do exactly the same for CO2 components. So as you can see here, no need for water use efficiency, only looking at turbulence. But I also designed this method here. What would happen to this method if we also gave the water use efficiency? Again, I want to avoid water use efficiency, but I also want to see how much more information it would add. And finally, I also developed the conditional added accumulation, which has a similar idea now, but instead of looking at sample fluxes, I'm going to be looking at sample concentrations. And I'm going to define a ratio based on these concentrations. Following a similar idea, I can combine with the total evapotranspiration and partition the fluxes. So I do apologize for all the acronyms and all the different methods, but what I'm trying to say is that all the methods that I develop have the conditional in the name because they're based on this idea of conditional sampling. Okay, but so I introduced three methods and I'm comparing to a benchmark model. Okay, so do they work? That's the main question, right? Especially when I'm not using any information about the plant. Can they give me realistic fluxes? And that was a challenge question in itself because I started this talk saying, hey, it's really hard for me to measure transpiration. But hey, this is a model now. I can estimate. So, is that good enough? So I need a data set that was closest to ideal as possible. And by ideal, I mean an experiment that had turbulence, but also an independent estimate of transpiration or soil evaporation, whatever was available. So I was very lucky to put my hands in this data set. That was a very controlled experiment in Kenya that was done in 2014. So in addition to measure turbulence, they also measured transpiration directly using leaf level chambers, as you can see at the top. So it was a very meticulous work about measuring transect and then extrapolating to this area that they were manually irrigating. So comparing with that, I'm showing here the first method that I proposed, the CEC, against the direct measurements. And as you can see, there is a very good agreement. So you see an increase in transpiration, and later, as they stop irrigating and the grass starts dying, you see a decrease in transpiration. So the results are very exciting. Just using turbulence here, we got so much information, but then you have the next question. Can we generalize? Because this is just one site. Was it just luck, or the method, in fact, works in many situations? So how can we address that? That was the only data set that I had that gave me something to compare against. So now, to move forward with this question, I have to move from a field experimental framework to a numerical framework. And that's what I'm going to do now. So I need a model that can solve turbulence and the turbulence transport of CO2 and water vapor. So the way that I'm going to do now is going to be using large edge simulations. So here I'm showing the main equations, conservation for mass, momentum, and scalar. So the second equation, for instance, has all the forces that govern the flow around us. And to represent trees, I have a drag term. So the trees are going to be a momentum sink that's trying to stop the flow. So that's how I'm going to represent that. And the last equation is the equation that is going to model the evolution of CO2 and water vapor. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to separate the equation for CO2 into two components, one from soil and one for canopy. And I'm allowed to do that because this equation is linear, so I can solve them separately, I can sample my solutions, and I can superimpose the solutions later on. It's going to be the same. So that allows me to reconstruct the solution as many times as I want. So I don't have to run the models that many times. I can just reconstruct the solution. Okay, so I have this framework now. What can I do? So I can test many conditions that I was not able in a field experiment, and that's because I'm going to be imposing every single flux component. So I'm going to also place virtual towers in my environment that will allow me to sample my time series at different heights and different locations. So now I have so much more information. What can I learn from it? So many more questions here. How good are the physical assumptions of the methods? What happens to flux partitioning when you think about the different flux magnitudes? But mostly interesting, what can I learn from my numerical simulation that can now help me inform real field experiments that I can design in the future? So when you start doing your simulations, you first need to make sure that your simulations are representative of the environment you're studying, and that's what I'm doing here. So here, I'm comparing different turbulent statistics. So for instance, panels A and B are correlations between velocities and between vertical velocity and water vapor. And in the context of turbulence, that tells me how efficient turbulence is in mixing quantities. And panels C and D have the total fluxes of momentum and evapotranspiration. And what I'm comparing here are the simulations, which are the different lines, and the field measurements, which are the markers. And as you can see, the agreement is very good. And what that tells me is that the findings that I have in my numerical simulation are going to be quite close to what I would have in a field experiment. So it allows me to do this extrapolation back and forth. Okay, so I have a simulation tool now that will allow me to represent turbulence, transporting CO2 and water vapor. What now? So one of the questions that I had initially is that there are many combinations of flux that you can have. Plants can be stronger, soil can be stronger for water vapor, vice versa for CO2. So to get as many combinations as possible, I'm first going to define these ratios here. So notice that I define a fictitious CO2 flux called RP, where I take the absolute value of photosynthesis, and that's just to avoid any division by 0 here. Okay? So now my ratios vary from 0 to 1. And what I can do now is to plot this diagram. So they're very 0 to 1 on both sides, so you can have combinations when you only have soil fluxes, and you can also have combinations with only plant fluxes, so those are combinations that can happen in a field experiment under different conditions, okay? We also have those corners that are less realistic, so they tell me that we only have transpiration but not photosynthesis, and photosynthesis but not transpiration. We know that's not really expected because transpiration and photosynthesis are coupled at leaf level. So what I really expect to see in a field experiment are combinations that are going to fall in that main diagonal. But just for completeness here, I'm going to include the entire diagram. Okay, and on top of this diagram now, what I can do is to superimpose the bias in the partitioning of the partition. So here I'm comparing the real transpiration that I imposed in the simulation versus the transpiration from any of the 4 partitioning methods that I introduced earlier. Okay, so moving on to results, I'm going to start with the benchmark model. Again, because it's widely used, so what can I learn here that's going to help it make it even better, right? So as I mentioned, it needs the water use efficiency, which is a variable that I know because I'm imposing in the simulation, okay? In addition, I'm also interested in seeing what happens as the sample time series further and further away from the canopy. And this is going to be clear later, and that's related to how efficient or how much time you're giving to turbulence to mix quantities. And also it's very relevant when you think about our eddy covariance towers. It's always a challenge to place your tower and to know exactly the height where you're going to put your sensors for various reasons, and so that's going to be clearer later. But here, comparing all the results and all the information I gave earlier, what I'm showing in the columns here is the bias. So green is zero bias, so that's great. So if you look at this figure here, you can see the results are amazing. FVS, or the benchmark model I tested, is very accurate. However, we had the water use efficiency, right? So I modeled, I know exactly the water use efficiency. Unfortunately, if you do experiments, this value is quite variable, so sometimes by many orders of magnitude in my experience, which of course is going to add uncertainties here. So I did some conservative perturbations here to water use efficiency, and of course this picture starts getting as green. But I still think the results are exciting here. So what can we do to constrain water use efficiency in experiments? Can you put an upper and lower bound? Perhaps that can help us also put an upper and lower bound in transpiration. But even if the water use efficiency was known, if you do experiments, another challenge with this method is that it's not guaranteed to find solutions. So it does not diverge all the time. So you often have a very gappy time series that will not allow you to compute budgets, for instance. So what I'm trying to say is that we should not use it alone. So we still need ways to improve, either by not having water use efficiency or by filling those gaps. So now I'm very excited to see what happens when you remove water use efficiency. Okay, and that's the conditional sampling methods that I developed. So all three here. And for now, I'm going to focus on what happens when I measure my time series at the top of the canopy. And here I'm showing all of them. Okay, so at first, you'll see that it's not as green as before, so I think it's not as good. But again, those corners are not to worry about, because we know that there are combinations that I don't really expect to see in a real experiment. So most likely, they'll fall in that region where the biases are low. And what this is telling me is that for all the methods based on this conditional sampling, the main assumption is really based on this coupling between the CO2 and water vapor at the leaf level. So as long as you have coupling, which would be in this diagonal, the methods should be working, or should give you a very good result. So this is at the top of the canopy, but now, second question, what happens if you sample time series away from the canopy? And that's what I'm going to show here for only one of the methods. So notice that now, from 1 times the canopy height all the way to 3 times the canopy height. So for those who are familiar with turbulence in the ABL, that would be almost leaving the roughness sublayer. So what can we see here is that as you move away from the canopy, this region with lower bias in green starts getting narrower and narrower. Okay, so the results start deteriorating. So ideally, if you're going to do an experiment for flux partitioning, this is telling me you should sample time series as close to the canopy top as possible. And the reason for that is quite simple. When you measure too far from the canopy, you're basically giving time and space for turbulence to mix things. So it's blending information from the soil and information from the canopy, okay? So to give you a visual picture of what's happening here, I have a short animation where the first panel I'm showing the CO2 field only assimilated by the canopy. So the color bars here in the negative, for instance, means that a parcel is depleted in CO2. So you can see those regions that are very depleted in CO2 that coincide around the top of the canopy. Okay, and that is what I would expect. We have plants uptaking CO2, and you see this depletion. Similarly, second panel has CO2 release from soil, so soil respiration. And again, you see these very organized structures that are very rich in CO2. Now, rich in CO2 is the red color, and that are being transported away, so the sensor will be able to see that. But what's most interesting is that when you combine the two, and you get the total CO2, and that's interesting because that's the only thing I can get in a real field experiment, the total. And you can still, we are still able to identify those structures in there. And what that tells me is that if I have a virtual tower in my domain, as it samples, as the flow evolves, if I sample my time series as close to the canopy top as possible, I'm going to get something that looks like that, where you can distinguish soil and canopy. Now, if you measure too far from the canopy, say 3 times the canopy height, you're going to get something like that. You see they are very high correlated, so you blended all the relevant information that you wanted. So that's not ideal. So to sum up, what I'm learning from here is that yes, turbulence alone can give us a lot of information from plants, as long as we plan or experiment carefully, such as measuring turbulence close to the sinks and sources. So just a quick summary of what I presented. So I started this project with some very exciting research questions, experimental data sets from many collaborators, trying to find the ideal data set, and later moving to a numerical framework. So this was like a back and forth that helped me inform how to design my simulations, but how to go back and improve the method. And at the end, I developed this set of guidelines that can now help us plan future experiments focusing on partitioning, such as where to place your tower as close as possible to the canopy. In the paper, I also investigate what happens when you have gaps, for instance, when you have canyons in between the vineyards, for instance, and so on. So you can be using that in the future. And since I started working on this, I have collaborated with a lot of people who are interested in using these partition methods for their own research questions. And I get asked a lot, which method is the best? And that's not even a fair question, because as I showed, they all have advantages and disadvantages. So they all have their own uncertainties. So the best way of doing this, in my view, is to implementing as many modules as you have. They all basically need the same information, so it's very easy to create a pipeline or implement them all, and you take an ensemble average, and often you see that there's a very good agreement across methods, and when they agree, similar to our climate models, for instance, that would be the best guess that we can have of what's going to happen. And quickly, just to illustrate, putting this all into action, I have recently developed this data set. So it's covering 47 towers in the United States, so all from the National Ecological Observatory Network. So for those who are not familiar, this is a very amazing data set. They have all the way from water quality to turbulence and so on. So it's very comprehensive. So I took data from other towers for 5 years, and I developed this data set, which is now the first data set of this type, so the most comprehensive of plant fluxes. And what I'm comparing here is the ratio of plant transpiration to total evapotranspiration averaged across ecosystems and seasons, and overall what you see here is quite a good agreement. So if you look at the agreement for even direct measurement, sometimes you see a much larger divergence, or the output of our climate models, for instance, they diverge quite a lot. So I was very pleased with these results, and I believe they can be helpful to answer many questions. So now, combining everything from numerical and experimental work, how can we go back from the atmosphere towards the plants? What can we learn about plants now? Or more broadly, can we use that to improve how we present our natural ecosystems in Earth system models? So that's one question that I'm very excited for the future. Perhaps we can improve our physical parameterizations or even develop data-driven approaches. We can also answer more specific questions, such as what environmental forces govern ET partitioning across ecosystems. And I have been collaborating with groups working on the response of different ecosystems to prolong the heat waves, for instance. And finally, I'm always very interested in land-atmosphere coupling. So what happens to our regional weather as you better represent plant transpiration? Thinking about the Amazon, it's very relevant for a local rainfall, for instance. So what's the impact that we'll see as we better represent those? Okay, so I apologize for a long presentation, but that's my last slide here. I just want to finish by thank you again. I'm really happy to be here. I'm really thankful to all of you. I want to acknowledge my collaborators, especially Professor Ellie Buzet, who's my advisor, funding from Princeton University, and also NSF and CAR, where I ran all the large edge simulations that I needed. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Really nice work.
Thank you.
Now the floor is open for questions.
Hi, that's really amazing work.
Thank you.
So I have, okay, I'm gonna go ahead and ask 2 questions. So my first question is, where does canopy evaporation come into play though, where there wouldn't be the same impact on the CO2? So when, you're you're having evaporation just from
You
the
mean
leaves.
interception?
Right, from interception.
That's a very good question. I ignore that for now. But I do have, so what I have here, for instance, even the data set I developed, what happens is that when you measure turbulence during rain and following rain, while the sensor is still wet, you lose all that data. So that's something already that I wasn't concerned in the beginning, because even if I wanted, it would be hard to include. But I do have some collaborators now that are, what they're doing is they're taking the data set, and they know that's going to be dry conditions, so they're training that to try to understand what's driving fluxes under dry conditions, to try to go back to the rainy days and try to understand the missing link that and add canopy interception on top.
Okay, interesting. Okay, thanks. My other question, so I was waiting to see how you would, I guess I was expecting that you were going to try to validate it or check it against isotopic methods for partitioning, since I feel like that's often what we have been relying on to try to partition. And I did see that you had a slide, and I know that often the complaint with that approach is there's such huge error bars, and it was impressive that your error bars are actually quite a bit smaller.
No, in fact, that's
Weren't
something
they,
I didn't
or-
mention. Those are not error bars for the direct measurements, because the error bars, sorry, sticking.
So
a
I
little.
guess
passed
my
right.
general question is, how are your results comparing with using isotope methods? for
Yeah,
partitioning?
so that's a good question. That's something that I definitely would like to have done more, but I just didn't have data, unfortunately. So this was the only experiment that had the isotopic data that I wanted. And the black markers here, what I'm doing, the range is actually from the averages from the subflow to the average of the leaf level measurement, and that's because this was an older paper, and they had lost the raw data. So all the data that they had available, I had to digitize from the paper. So that's why I didn't have as much information. So for instance, they lost the CH exchange from the leaf level chamber. They also lost. They didn't have that data anymore, unfortunately. So just showing how the average is changing from two different direct measurements, you can see that's very large. But I would love to try again if I had more data for other ecosystems.
Thank you.
Very nice simulation. I have a question. How do you think the shear vortices at the top of canopy and the canopy density affect the results? And on one of the slides, you mentioned the over edge. I guess edge is the canopy height is less than 3, but that still seems way above the shear vortices.
Yes, that's a good question. Where do you put your sensor? So definitely if the canopy is too dense, that's not good. But that's not good only for partition. That's not good for fluxes in general, because you're always going to run into the decoupling between what's happening above or at the top of the canopy and what's happening below. So definitely a very dense canopy is not good. In terms of measurement, when we do place or design an air covariance tower, you try to be as far as you can from the canopy, because we want to be far from the effects of those localized vortices and the roughness sublayer. But in reality, that's very hard, because some forests are very tall, like the Amazon is very tall. So placing the sensor as far as you want, it's going to be hard. So they'll end up being close, and that's going to work to my advantage for flux partitioning. So for instance, if you're designing an experiment that you know that the tower, the sensor will be very far, for the sake of flux convergence, for instance, if possible, you still want to measure the top of the canopy for a short period, or have two sensors if you have, to at least get the ratio of the flux at the top of the canopy.
Thanks.
Okay, we have a question from online. This is from Shua. How do you treat the points in the lower quadrants, i.e. those that are depleted in water? How do you partition those samples?
The ones, okay. So the ones that are not, maybe I should go to the figure. Okay, the ones that are outside the regions I highlight, right? I'm assuming that it's about those points that I am ignoring here, okay? So those points, they are not going to be included in the ratio, because my assumption, so I think I also forgot to mention that I'm only considering updrafts. So updraft, something that's coming from below towards the sensor above, right? So my assumption is that we have a pair of air that's coming from the ground or from the canopy towards the sensor. And that pair, so it has to be rich in water vapor and CO2 to be considered from the ground, or depleted in CO2, rich in water vapor, coming from the canopy towards the sensor. Those points are only for the ratios, but when I'm looking at the total fluxes, then I'm going to include every single point that I'm sampling. So I'm going to include all the points here for the total fluxes, but for the ratios that I use to partition, just the points that I highlight. Hope that makes sense.
Thank you for the presentation. It's really cool. I have 2 questions.
Yeah.
One is, you have a slide that says if we actually know the water use efficiency, we'll be able to improve what we know about partitioning. I was wondering if you could speak on, like, now that you've done this work to look at flux partitioning, could we actually go back and like infer some of the plant behavior or soil, like that kind of stuff from this like kind of
Yes.
down sample?
Definitely. Okay, there are a few nuances to this answer. So here you'll notice that I focus a lot on evapotranspiration. I talked a lot of transpiration and evaporation, and that was not on purpose. Is that because I know how to constrain total evapotranspiration. I have a positive evaporation and a positive transpiration. I have a ratio I can go ahead and partition, right? But when you think about CO2, you have a photosynthesis, which is negative, and have CO2 respiration from the soil, which is positive, right? So when you add them together, it can be any number. So even though I have a ratio, I cannot constrain the magnitude because you have -1, 1, -2, 2. They are going to sum up to exactly the same value. So we still need a way to constrain CO2 flux partitioning for the future. And that's tied with water use efficiency in a way that if I had the right water use efficiency, I could constrain CO2. Or if I could constrain CO2, I could go back and try to understand the water use efficiency. So it's like a coupled problem that I think it will have to come from the water use efficient side on how to better estimate or constrain to better infer the partitioning of CO2.
Okay, actually that kind of leads to my second question, which was when you're looking at the area covariance data, I'm assuming that nighttime and daytime will have very different signals just
Yes.
based on plant behaviors.
Yeah.
And wouldn't some of that average out in some way?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And all the analyses I've done here are usually only daytime. And the reason is that at night, most likely don't have photosynthesis unless they have like cam plants or plants that are uptaking CO2 at night, which are usually not perceptible in the eddy covariance. So measurements of CO2 are noisy in nature, especially at night when turbulence is quieter or you have very low magnitudes of CO2. So using CO2 measured at night is usually very tricky. So I constrain looking at what happens during the day.
Questions? Okay.
Very nice talk, Dr. Zahn. Yes, I have a question regarding, could you talk a bit about the parameterization for the canopy in your simulations?
Yeah.
So how was it?
Yes.
Did you
So that one was actually quite simple. So let me see if it's easy here. I don't have the equation, but basically what we often do is a simple drag term. So it's a drag that's proportional to the velocity squared. And that's going to be scaled based on the leaf area density. So the canopy is much more denser at the top where I have more leaves. So that's going to be proportional to that. So only in the grid points that I have a canopy. So in this case, I have, I believe, 16 grid points that represent a canopy. Each grid point, I'm going to have a drag term that's proportional to the density of the tree at that height. Yeah, so it's quite a simple term, but as you saw in the comparisons, usually works quite well.
With respect to the buoyancy term, since you focus more on the daytime, was it convective?
Yes, that's a good point. Here, the simulations I showed are all neutral. It could be easily be done with buoyance. I haven't gotten to that point, but my feeling of what may happen is that as long as you don't have a very strong convection or too much of a stratification there that kills turbulence, the results should be extrapolated to those conditions too. Yeah, that's something that I'm planning on doing in the future. But, yeah.
And how important is the turbulence in the free stream? How does it affect the measurements and the data?
The imposed forcings, you mean?
I mean, like we expect turbulence in the free stream above.
Yeah, I haven't done any sensitive tests where I, for instance, change so the simulations are driven by a geostrophic forcing.
Yeah.
I haven't done a lot of sensitivity tests, but I don't think that it would be very much for a reasonable convective boundary layer or neutral boundary layer that we have.
Okay. Thank you.
One last question. Okay, do I have on again? Yeah, so in a very nice picture of that forest, is that Amazon? Or?
Yes.
Okay, that's not my question, okay. My question is, I saw in your abstract that you mentioned the MO similarity, so I'm wondering if you have any comments about that.
Yes, that's a good question. I feel like, as with many researchers who work on similarity theory in the surface layer, I have this like love-hate relationship with Monin-Bukov. So when I started looking at Monin-Bukov in the Amazon. And of course, when you look at the roughness of the layer, it never works. Oh. So then working with Eddie, okay, let's look at this lake, because lake is as flat as you can get. It was a very large fetch, and he designed the experiment, so we knew the data was good. And even above the lake, we saw, okay, Monin-Bukov does not always work. And that's now dependent on the flux magnitude. So what we found that we were looking at the various budgets in there. And what we found is that when the fluxes are very small, in case CO2 over a lake, for instance, the local fluxes are so small that all that you get is advection from nearby. So Monin-Bukov breaks down very often. So even under the ideal conditions that we always talk about, flat, long fetch, sunny day, Monin-Bukov is still only going to work as long as the local fluxes are very large.
I see.
So that was the...
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. Great. Yeah. Actually, that solved my question when I saw that picture. It's so flat. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Well, let's congratulate and thank Dr. Zahn again.
Thank you.
This concludes this ceremony.